We're going up and down, over and over, over and over. It's the same old thing. Up and down, over and under.
George, welcome to the show. Really excited to speak with you today.
Welcome. The welcome is welcomed, Mr. Ken. Appreciate you. Or KG. You're another KG.
I know. Yeah, Kenny G made growing up a little tough,
Oh,
but yeah,
man.
there's a lot of good KGs out there.
You're lucky you don't have a name like George, so you don't have to hear the Georgie Porgy pudding and pie.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, George, we were just catching up. I just went back and listened to your book again, and just so thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's funny. Oftentimes, selfishly, a lot of these conversations that I get to have, they seem to catch me at a time in life when I really kind of need it.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So for me, it was part just like getting prepared, but also part just like, oh man, like, yeah, that's such a great perspective. Like, oh man, that's so important to remember. God, I got to start implementing that into my own routine. But you were just telling me something really interesting, and I know I'm jumping way ahead here, but I just thought it was so powerful. That you yourself still go back and revisit your book.
Yes, I've read it over 50 times, and I go back. I do this with a lot of books, but I do it with my own. I go back, especially when I'm going to work with a new client, or we have the online course, the Mindful Athlete online course, and twice a year we have these study groups, 6-week study groups. And so each time we go through that twice a year, those are occasions where I'll read my book again. I'll go through, like when we're working on mindfulness, I'll read the chapter on mindfulness. We go through trust, I'll read the chapter on trust. And vis-a-vis with concentration, with insight and diligence or effort. So I just read through them, and it's powerful. And because each time I read it, I get something different, or I see it different because I'm different. Everything else is different. Things are always changing. So we have this idea of stability or status, that we're either we can stay the same. We're either moving backwards or forwards. And what happens is because things change, I change, conditions change. When you look at it, you might detect that something's different. You'll pick up something, like you just said. Depends on, people don't realize when we look at things, it depends on habitual way, or our tendencies, our mental tendencies, habits. And the other thing is the quality of mind that we're in. So those things have an impact. So you're not in the same quality of mind. It's like you can't step in the same river. You step in and it's a different river. It's the same thing with us. Everything is changing, but we have this ability to create this illusion where we keep seeing the same things the same way and not realizing that everything is changing. And so when you read it, you're going to get something else because you're different.
Yeah. No, and it's funny. It makes me think like, oh man, there's so many good books that I should go back and read again because if I read it at 22, I'm a completely different version of myself here at 35, married, 3 kids.
Yes, full catastrophe.
Oh boy, we are knee deep. My kids are amazing, but things stay pretty busy over here.
I stole that from Sober the Greek.
Okay.
He says, and my friend John Kabat-Zinn wrote a book called Full Catastrophe Living. That's when he introduced mindfulness-based stress reduction to the world. And he got it from the line in Sober the Greek when he says, are you married? He said, yeah, married, kids, full catastrophe.
I love it.
So it's good.
Completely accurate also.
Yeah, but it's a joyful, right, catastrophe, right? Because that's what it is. That's what life is about.
Well, and something that I would love to introduce to the listeners. People might be familiar with your work, and I mean, you've made an impact for so many unbelievably talented, high-profile individuals. Names like Michael Jordan, Phil Jackson, Kobe Bryant. But something that I really thoroughly enjoyed about your book is your willingness to be open about kind of like your own journey to becoming who you are today. Right. And I don't want to steal your thunder, but I just felt like that was so important because so many people are struggling with, whatever it is in their own personal life. And when you see someone who has attained some level of success, you often don't realize like what they might have gone through to go there. And in understanding
Yes.
that in itself could be inspiring. So if you don't mind, I would love for you to share a little bit of your background with the listeners.
Yes. Oh, where do I start? Let's just say, let's just say, so today is the July 8th, and 22 days, I'll be celebrating 38 years of sobriety.
Oh, amazing.
Yes. And the road there, it's just it's not a straight line. It's all over the place. But I was born one of 13, but I was very quiet, introverted, and I played sports, and sports was an outlet for my expression because I didn't say much. I just let my action do the talking for myself. And so when I got injured in college, I would have been a walk-on my sophomore year. I got injured, and before that, growing up now, and I think about it, I've had a lot of stress growing up in my family. So I had GI problems, and I was injury prone. So I was always on medication. And I noticed when I had the medication, I was able to get out of myself, and it was a different, it altered my consciousness. And so I got addicted to pain meds, then illegal drugs, and I was a functional substance abuser. So I still worked and everything. And what I did, but it cut me off from some of my friends. Like I roomed with Dr. J and Al Skinner and Rick Pitino. All of us were at UMass at once. But I shielded myself from them because I had that double life. I was doing drugs and alcohol, so I didn't want that to come, to taint my relationship. So I pretty much cut off a lot of those relationships for a lot of years. And while I was actively engaged in that, and then at one point, I got tired of being sick and tired, and I got clean. I went to AA meeting on April Fool's Day. Who does that? And then I got clean. And then 3 months later, I was in a 21-day detox. And when I came out, it was totally different. So I was one of the, I forget her name, but she's the new coach at Duke, and she did something on Twitter and talking to her team about how nothing's going to be easy. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be a struggle. It's going to be difficult. And it reminded me of several years ago, I was working with a volleyball team, and they kept expressing this desire to go to a softer, easier way. And one of my Georgisms, or something that just comes out of the silence, I said, "No struggle, no swag." So
I love it.
So that's my life. And so I got swag. Yeah, I got swag, but I earned it. You got to earn that swag. Nobody just says you have it, or you don't get it from your parents or whatever. We're all programmed. We all have a masterpiece inside. So we're all programmed for success, but only you can access it. It's an inside job. It's an inner game. You have to make a choice. And so for me, I call it the AOF method of motivation. You read in my book, which really means ass on fire. So when you're desperate, desperation is a gift. So when you say, okay, everything I've done doesn't work, so I'm open and willing to try something else. And so coming full circle, the best way to keep something is give it away. And the best way to learn something is to teach it. So for me, sharing my story, what else could it be? Authenticity, being sincere. This is where I came from. That wasn't a curse. That was a blessing. And that's a choice.
Right. That's the first thing that came to my mind when you just said that. I was like, that is very much a matter of perspective, because there's a lot of people who, would just as easily say like, oh, well, poor me.
Yeah.
I'm a victim of my circumstance, or, it's because of, I went through this.
Or what I call the B&D. You know what the B&D is?
No.
Blame and denial. So with the B&D, you don't take personal responsibility. You don't say, I am responsible, period. I'm not responsible for what happened to me, but I am responsible with how I respond or react to it. And that's the thing. And so when we can understand that when there's no space between stimulus and response, we react, and we can say, the devil made me do it, or it wasn't the right time, or I'm not tall enough, I'm not fast enough, whatever. Instead of creating space between stimulus and response, and in that space, I choose freedom. I have the freedom and
Hmm.
power to choose, and that's a choice to saying, okay, the glass is half empty or half full. Both are right, but if I look at it as half empty, I'm coming from survival mode, and if I look at it as half full, I'm coming from growth mode or fear and love. And you
Hmm.
got to be in love because on a cellular level, each cell is either in survival mode or growth mode. You can't be in both.
Yeah.
So when you're in survival mode, all you got to notice is I'm in survival mode. Survival mode says, yeah, I had drugs and oh, woe is me. And growth mode is, okay, there's a lesson here. There's an opportunity
Hmm.
here. And how can I relate to it in a way that empowers me, motivates me, inspires me
Yeah.
to say, okay, this is not a roadblock. This is a stepping stone. And so
Hmm.
that's a perspective. That's getting into the growth mindset or coming from love. Love, when you love something, you make it grow. You
Yeah.
care for it, and love and understanding. There's a lot of they could be one and the same. If you love somebody, or if you love something, you seek to make it grow. You seek to understand it, seek
Hmm.
to nurture it. And so,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
That does. And one of the things that I really enjoyed listening to the book back was, and I think you just said as much, it's like, maybe I'm not saying it the correct way, but like growth can come from desperation.
Yes.
And it just, that just kind of like really hit me. And I started reflecting back, like there's a bunch of individuals or historical figures that I love to learn about. And it almost feels like there's at least been some like extreme adversity that they've had to overcome
Yes.
that preceded them having this, like historical greatness
Yes.
that came afterwards, right? I mean, like real lows, depths,
Mm-hmm.
challenges. And I've just always thought like, oh man, that's so interesting. And it's funny, like in my personal life right now, like going through a little bit of adversity myself, and reading this was just kind of like, oh man, like no, this is like an opportunity. Like I didn't ask for this,
Yeah.
and I surely would have avoided it. However, it's like, okay, like what would someone who is a great individual, like how would they respond to this?
Yes.
And reading your book, when I said like, oh man, this kind of found me at the right time. So yeah, it makes complete sense to me, and I think in a way it's very inspiring and motivating, right?
Yes.
To hear that, like, hey, look, like something that is a real challenge or hurdle can actually be setting you up for like really substantial growth, and you don't know where that growth is going to take you in the future.
Yes. Hans Selye, who wrote the book The Stress of Life, he talks about the idea of when we are challenged, then our latent abilities are able to express themselves. And so it's in the baptism of the fire, if you will, that there's an occasion for us to meet the challenge. And for that greatness, that masterpiece within, I call it, some people call it Christ consciousness or Buddha nature or the divine spark. You could call it whatever. Or you can just look at it as creative energy. There's a creativity that comes out of it, adversity, where you look at it from that love perspective and say, what's the lesson? Where's the opportunity here? And that's a totally different psychology. And it changes everything. It changes your ability to feel what we call strong self-efficacy belief or resilience. That this would, there's a whole, positive psychology with Martin Seligman, and he talks about interpretive styles. So you interpret things, something happens, and then we choose how we interpret what it means. We give meaning to everything we have. We're the ones that give meaning to it. It doesn't have meaning in and of itself. It's our interpretation or our view of it. And so once we get that we are co-creators and we get to choose if we want to be a victim or not a victim,
Yeah.
that's really powerful. And just by making that choice, just having one little modicum of control, we're saying, okay, something's happening to me, and then I can choose how I respond to it. Nelson Mandela said that they have my freedom, but I'm not going to give them my mind, when he was in jail for 30 years or whatever. And he said that having resentment, he didn't have any resentment. He said having resentment is like me drinking poison and thinking it's going to affect the other person. That's a good one, right?
That is a good one.
So, and as a recovering person, a person in recovery, I can't afford resentments. I can't afford to be in fear, doubt, and insecurity, because we know those choices lead to more suffering or more ignorance and more discomfort. Whereas embracing it and saying yes to it, then there's an opportunity for that divine spark, for that creative energy to flow.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I can't remember where I read this, but it also just reminded me of, and I'm going to butcher this, but it's basically like a seed can't grow without cracking the shell.
Yes, this is true.
Right? Yeah, maybe someone listening is like, that's not how that saying goes, but it's that same concept. It's like, man, it's like sometimes to like realize your full potential, you need, you know, a real motivator.
Yes.
And sometimes that motivator can be a real negative consequence or experience.
Yes, if we think about one of the greatest basketball players of all time got cut from his high school team, well, that should tell you something.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that just, you know, I mean, I've watched every Michael Jordan documentary I think there is known to man. But yeah, I mean, that's like one of those like stories. And I remember being motivated by that as a kid. It's like, you know, you just hear like his response to that, the tireless work ethic, the time and dedication, and ultimately who he became. Again, another perfect example, right? It's like, it wasn't just a clear path to him from age 10 where everyone identified he was going to be the greatest of all time. There was response to like, you know, someone telling him like, hey, you're not gonna be able to play.
Yes. And in true MJ fashion, several years ago, I think coming up to this month or next month, when they have the induction in the Hall of Fame, he had the coach that cut him at the Hall of Fame and said, dude, you made a mistake. You know, you say, well, dude, you know, you've done all this, and you bring the guy in and say that, but that's MJ. And he said that, and he smiled at him. But I also hear part of the story was, this is what I heard. I thought I heard this, that when he got cut, the person cut him, or somebody said, okay, so we're going to work out every morning. And so he got busy. So his response to that was, okay, I'm going to get better. And so he did get better. And I think he grew like 4 or 5 inches. That kind of helped. But it wasn't so much the inches, because you could see it's the heart. It's the inner part of the person that expresses that creative energy. And that's the thing. We all can say that. Do we have situations in our lives now where we can look at it and make a choice that is affirmative? It says yes to life, and goes from there. Viktor Frankl, not only was he a Holocaust survivor, but he wrote Man's Search for Meaning once when he was captured. They had it in the lining of his coat, and when they go into these concentration camps, they take all your stuff away from you. So he lost the book and he had to rewrite it, and that rewriting of the book might have caused him to live.
Wow.
So
I've never heard that.
Yeah, so that's it. So there's all these stories we never heard of, or we may not have heard of, that people struggle, or you have to raise on d'entrée. You have to find a reason for being, and it's not something where there's this canned version of, okay, this is this is your life. You have to go inside and seek, you know, why am I here, and how can I be my best version of myself, and how can I serve? So you can find meaning. This is what Viktor Frankl says. You can find meaning through a work of art, or doing a deed, from encountering someone or experiencing something, and that's love, really. And then the third thing is to make a choice towards unavoidable suffering. So that you are suffering, you're dying of cancer, and you say, okay, I'm dying, but I'm going to live fully until my last breath. So it's have taken a stand. It's choosing a response to unavoidable suffering. And he says, when you find meaning in suffering, it ceases to be suffering. But I know I just threw a lot of existential stuff at you, but it just came off that way. So
yeah, no, I mean, it's incredible, right? And maybe this is even a good segue, but it just shows the importance of having a purpose and just how powerful the mind and the perspective you choose to take is ultimately on, like, you being able to help determine your outcome.
Yes, and we have this imagination. We have this ability to imagine and look beyond our current situation. And that imagination is more important than knowledge. I believe that's a quote from Einstein. But
That's
imagination,
amazing.
we have that. We can imagine. That's what makes us different. We can envision. And then if we use the imagination in a proper perspective, in terms of what we can do, what we can accomplish, how we can serve, it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked a lot about mindset, I would say, but you're known for mindfulness,
Yes.
for incorrect or otherwise. How does, like, a mindset like this work hand in hand with, like, the concept or approach of mindfulness? And maybe even to answer that question, you could talk about, like, how you define mindfulness, because I think some people's minds might go to a strict meditative practice.
Right.
Some people's might go to just, trying to be more aware of what's happening around you. How do you define mindfulness?
Mindfulness is mirror mind. It's just being able to see things in ways where you allow whatever you're observing to speak in its own language. So even though you may encounter the thing multiple times, can you see it with fresh eyes, with new eyes? Can you see it as if you're seeing it for the first time? And so mindfulness, this mindfulness, I was just listening to this book, the Talent Code. I've been listening to it for the last month or so. I keep meditating on it. And he talks about, I forget the guy's name, but this guy at the turn of the century was an amazing bank robber. They used to rob banks at night. And then when they got hip to that, then he would case of place, and then he have different roles. So he made effort, he was mindful, and he was concentrated. And he was very good at robbing banks. But that's not right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. That has to come out of wellness or well-being, or coming out of love, not coming out of fear or greed. And so a lot of people have this idea that mindfulness is by itself is enough. That's why I talk about the 5 superpowers. You have to be mindful, but when you make effort, it has to be balanced with concentration. And when you have faith or trust, it has to be balanced with insight or wisdom. And if you have too much wisdom and not enough faith, you become cynical. If you have too much faith and not enough wisdom, you become polyamorous. So you have to balance that. So mindfulness allows us to balance that. Just like if you're trying too hard, like Sisyphus, pushing a rock up the hill, and you don't have poise or steadiness of mind or concentration or focus, then it becomes frenetic. But if you have too much concentration or too much poise, then you become lethargic. So mindfulness helps develop those qualities as well. It helps us to develop them. And so if you look at it just from that point of view, mindfulness by itself is not enough. You can be mindful, but you have to have the wisdom component coming from love, right? If we just say it that way, and you have to make the right effort. And the effort has to be steady and continuous, but balanced, right? Not too frenetic, not too low. You got to find that right. Like guitar, you got to have that guitar or violin string at the right pitch. So it's not too loose, not too tight, not too taut. So if you look at it that way, and so when I look at mindfulness, right mindfulness, has to do with this idea of love, or constructing, creating, being inclusive. It's a way of being which is conducive to peace and wholeness and compassion and love, but also productivity. So love is productive. It's something that when you love something, you make it grow instead of tearing something down or restricting the growth or the flow of life. Does that make sense? So I got a
That
little
does make
technical there.
sense.
So even though I use
No.
mindfulness, I'm known as performance whisperer, but it's really more about performance. It's just being able to do what you intend to do. It's really that simple. But not just doing it, but doing it in a way that excites you and you're enthusiastic about but it's powerful, and you're getting probably more than you had hoped for, because you're not limiting yourself. You're just fully engaged and fully deployed in the moment. That's pretty much it. and
Hmm.
and fully expressing yourself. Bruce Lee, one of my heroes, he said that martial arts is to honestly express yourself. So we're talking about that masterpiece within. We're talking about that spirit, that divine spark that expresses itself in a way where I and the other are one. It gets beyond the illusion of separateness, and we're talking about love. We're talking about how can we rise all boats. It's that kind of energy that
Yeah.
is inclusive, but it's love. I don't know how else to say it. As the Beatles said, all you need is love. So, yeah.
Well, and I think that all makes sense. I think my next question would be, so understanding, that that's what mindfulness is. Where do you even begin when you start working with, some of these like high performers, whether it be athletes, people in
Yes,
business?
yes. The
Where, where,
idea
where
is,
do you even begin?
yes, you begin with where you are. You begin with the moment, with the now, but it's really talking about what I begin with. What do you want? And sometimes we don't know
Hmm.
what we want. And so I usually begin with, what do you want? But then the second part of that question is, who do you need to be to do what you want to do? So let's just take love. So if you want love, then you got to be loving.
Hmm.
If you want peace, you got to be peaceful. You got to be peace. If you want
Yeah.
understanding, you have to be understanding. If you want forgiveness, you got to be forgiving. So it's understanding that, but it really comes down to, it's interesting. There was 2 podcasts I was on, and they asked me three things that I know, and I answered in the same way, and I didn't know I answered in the same way until I reflected on it and realized I said the same thing. I said the only time is now. The only
Hmm.
person I can be is me. Be yourself, and the only thing you need is love.
Hmm.
So that's the simplicity of it. So who you are is an inside job, right? And but the now, it doesn't matter who you are. The only time we have is now, the power of now. And the only time you can make a change, the only time you can be is now. Well, now we could think about the past or the future in the now, but if we're thinking about the past and the future, we're not here. So yes,
And,
we have to project forward and we have to learn from our mistakes. But ultimately, all of that happens in the now. So if you manage the moment, everything else is going to be fine. So when I talk to athletes and performers about being in the zone or being in flow, being in the flow of
yeah.
life, I would say, or being spontaneous. That's what
Hmm.
it is, being spontaneous. And you're doing it for no reason. You're just doing it in and of itself. When you're in the moment and you're fully engaged, fully deployed, fully present, that has so much power in it, so much joy, I would say, and
Yeah.
so much of this feeling fully alive. That's what it's all about. So when I talk to the athletes about being in flow, they get it. But we all can be in flow. And Csikszentmihalyi, the father of flow, we consider, he had this exampling sampling method, ESM, where he would. This is how old this is. He would page people and they would stop and write about their experience and how they're feeling and whatnot. And he discovered that most people are in flow a lot or sometimes in their lives, but they don't know it because they don't know how to recognize it. And once you recognize it, this is what mindfulness helps us with, is once you know, okay, this is really good, I love this, then you ask the how-to question. And then
Yeah.
you seek to understand what are the conditions in which that arises spontaneously or it rises as a consequence of the conditions. And so
Hmm.
that's it. So you have to understand that. So when I start talking about performing at a high level, and even someone like an MJ, be able to say to MJ, yeah, you're operating at a really high level, but there's another level. Then
Hmm.
there's another level. It's unlimited what we can do if we're willing to just keep getting out of our comfort zone, to get comfortable being uncomfortable and continue to get into that state where we're on the edges of our potential and we're just pushing, we're moving, we're flowing through it, we're easing through it, not pushing through it, but easing through it, or letting the flow of life just flow. It's like Bruce Lee, be like water. You go with the current. And then when you get to where
Yeah.
you need to go over, but you have to understand all of the conditions, and especially the internal conditions,
Hmm.
the inner game, how you're seeing things, how you're thinking, how you're feeling, what choices you are making, what goals are you setting, what do you understand to be the purpose of your life.
Hmm.
And that's an evolving thing. Sometimes instead of saying why am I here or the purpose of my life, a lot of times it's just how can you serve, how can you help someone, or do what you know to do, and then the next step will be given to you. So if you know you want to be loving, then you have to be loved. And so it doesn't matter work, love, or play. You have an opportunity to express that, to be that.
Yeah. Well, and as I was thinking through this, right? Because on the one hand, it's like, okay, mindfulness at face value sounds great for someone who maybe is like a professional golfer, right? Because I think mindfulness for a lot of people stirs up images of like calm, serenity. But when you think about maybe someone in the NFL, you're like, boy, I don't know if that translates to performance. But what you just said, it's about like flow,
Yeah,
about
and
like,
it's like, and it's time when you got to meet the intensity of the other person. And so, do you do butt heads, or do you do Tai Chi and Qigong, or Aikido, and just redirect the energy? So
hmm,
so people have this idea of relax is like this. You can be relaxed and alert and
okay,
on purpose.
yeah,
So you understand what I'm saying? So you can do it, and you can do it. People use the word force. When you use force, you have to keep pushing, and you have to, it's not sustainable. You have to keep generating more force. But when you have power, it flows.
hmm,
It flows. It just goes because you're in alignment. And when there's alignment, it just flows. You don't have to do anything. It's happening by itself. It's happening because you gotten out of the way and you allow it. And when you see people talk about being in the zone of flow, first thing they say is, I'm not there. There's no self-consciousness. And the activity is just blending. Like when I use it in my book, when David Carradine's character in Kung Fu, Kwai Shai Kane is saying, you know, I just, I'm not, it just happens, I will bow and it happens. It hits the bullseye without trying to hit the bullseye. And the guy says, you think I'm not believing that? Then he closes his eyes and he's able to do it. And that's it. You intend and then you allow. You intend and
hmm,
you allow. So it's a way of being that's really powerful, but it's contrary to how we think things. We think that you have to work hard and you have to be angry or you have to be forceful, and that force
right,
doesn't work. And you can see in our government and other things, when people use force, you got to keep generating more force, and no one wants to be forced to do anything. It's intrusive and it's not caring. And
hmm,
so to be able to have people make the choice on their own and be and to be self-reliant or to have their own mind and thoughts, and that's unfortunately not what's happening. People are allowing other people to tell them how to be or what to think, and people will do that. They'll tell you they think you should be or who you ought to be. And the real challenge for us is for us to make the choice and not let somebody choose for us, because we can only be ourselves, and that's an inside job. And I'm not
yeah,
saying we all have to be a certain way or another. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that we have to just, know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. It's really simple.
hmm.
And that's just
Well, and
embracing it and
you,
saying whatever's happening is happening because the conditions are right for whatever is happening to be happening. And our job is to say yes to it, to embrace it and generate the hope and ask the question, okay, how do I relate to this situation authentically,
hmm,
based on my own values and based on my inner wisdom? Or if I say I
hmm,
want to be loving and the situation happens, am I going to be hating or am I going to be loving? And can I be loving and still be firm and say no, or be firm and say I'm not? That's not what I want. So
yeah,
people get this all or nothing instead of seeing it's not black and white. There's gray areas. There's gradations of things, and life is complicated. It's not so simplistic. We try to make it simple, but it's complicated. Like people are complicated. I don't know if you noticed that. And there's complexity.
I've
So
noticed.
so this VUCA thing that the military talks about, things VUCA, VUCA, from moment to moment. There's VUCA. What is VUCA? Things are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Huh.
So we have to
Never heard
embrace
that.
that. And it's through the ambiguity, it's through the uncertainty, it's through the volatility or the chaos that we find the light. So chaos is just another word for not knowing the pattern that's involved in it. We see it as chaos because we don't understand it.
Man, I have so many questions for you, and I'm trying to keep an eye on time here. So
Yeah, because I'm kind of flowing today, man.
oh, it's fantastic. No, it's so good. Well, can we do? I have two questions,
Yes.
and I'll let you choose how you want to answer them. You mentioned one thing that I thought was really interesting is that some people don't necessarily understand when they're in a flow state. So I think like a lot of athletes can relate to some moment in their playing career where they felt in the zone.
Right.
But I would love to hear kind of like how you define a flow state. But the second thing that I would love to know, and one of the kind of visuals that stayed with me from your book is talking about Kobe on the bench in the finals. And I think like Chris Rock and David Spade were trying to get in his head. And you could see that he was doing something to just get himself so focused and in the moment that he was just kind of maybe oblivious is not the right word, but he was not giving what was happening around him any credence to affect his mindset. And then I think there's a similar example for LeBron. So I would kind of love to know, like how what is flow state for people who are listening and maybe they're like, man, I don't really know if I've ever been in that. And then two, like you've worked with so many amazing folks, like are there some interesting, consistent traits for people who are elite performers? And are those things that were innate, or are they things that folks could kind of develop?
Yes. So those are conditions. So mindfulness makes you flow ready. So what you're really trying to do is you're trying to, and it's interesting because we have this, what they call implicit learning or non-declarative learning, that we learn more unconsciously than we do consciously. So when you're in the flow state, your challenges are high. And this is the graph, and your skills, knowledge, and experience are high. So it's when your knowledge and skills are high and you're at that place where you're a little bit out of your comfort zone, whatever. So you get into a high state of arousal. So you're more alert and everything. But if you can keep the steadiness, when I talk about, making the effort, but, slow, here's the thing. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That's a flow state. So you start off slow and you're just doing the next thing and you're in the moment. And then you, as George Bush Sr. would call it, you get the big mo. And the big mo is momentum. So 1 + 1 = 2, but then it equals 6 at some point. It just jumps exponentially. So it's like you're on a waterway, you're in the river, and you're going to and fro, and then you notice you catch a current, and you just let the current carry you. That's a flow state. And so my first flow state that I'm conscious of was when I was a young guy. I don't know if I was 8, 9, or 10 or whatever. We were playing electric football at a friend's house, and it was just magical. It's like we were going and we were putting these little things and they vibrate, and I lost, the time and everything. And I think for a lot of my years, even when my younger brothers were younger, I kept buying that electric football game for their Christmas present because I wanted to experience that experience again. So I think we all have it. So I've had it with that. I have it a lot now in life. Even when we're on this call, I have that idea of just allowing, just being mindful and just following whatever the pattern or the current is. And it's an unconscious thing. It's not something that I'm consciously trying to do, because if you consciously try to get in the flow, you won't. But there's conditions that you can create, like you can keep challenging yourself. I talk about it in my book. You got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And there's a whole, actually, Dr. Herbert Benson talks about struggle. You struggle with something. There's a word struggle again. And then you let it go and you're walking and you release, you surrender it. And then you have a flow state. Then you're in the flow state. And then you have a new normal. So he has a very, okay, he said you struggle with something, but then when you let go or you give it to God or you just, set it aside, that's when the answer comes. And so there's this idea of, and Alan Watts started it. Well, the first time I heard it, he said to ask the question is to know the answer. So the question and the answer are two sides of the coin. So if you can look in the same place, and sometimes we try too hard, which most of us do, or not try hard enough. And then once we stop trying, then it happens. Case in point here, I've been trying to write a book for 20 years. And once I stopped trying to write the book, it wrote itself. That's a good one, huh?
That is a good one.
So you can have a flow state in many ways, but you got to look at it. But there's conditions like you disappear. There's no self-consciousness. There's an effortlessness, and there's an ease, and there's this magical quality of like you're being carried, and it's an amazing experience. You see things. There's premonition. You see things before they happen. You're on a different level of consciousness. But really, what it is, it's just being spontaneous. It means you're going into a situation with no intention. You might have a purpose and you say, okay, this is like, okay, I want to go to Mount Olympus. And someone asked Socrates, how do you get to Mount Olympus? And he said, just take one step at a time in that direction. Or as Emerson says, do the thing and you will have the power. And the Bible says, do what you know to do and the next step will be given to you. These are all things. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So it's really a matter of you just being fully engaged in the moment without focusing on the results, but just doing the thing in and of itself. This is what Csikszentmihalyi calls the autotelic personality or style, which means you do it in and of doing the thing in and of itself for no reason other than to be fully engaged, fully expressed in the moment.
Yeah, I'm reflecting back on, I played college football, and towards the end of what was basically my senior year, I had 2 games where I just completely, there was a lot of craziness in my life at that point happening around me at that time. But I can almost definitively on the first game remember like when I got into like a flow state. And I just remember so vividly how much everything slowed down.
That's right.
And then just how easy everything became. Where the contrast to that is I can remember other games, a mile a minute. Everything is happening too fast, especially, when you just jump up to a new level, just chaotic.
That's right.
And you don't know how to move within it. But then just, the dichotomy of how it felt being in the zone. That, what did you say? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I mean, that just like,
yes. And the
that
thing
completely makes sense.
Think about a non-digital clock. A non-digital clock is right twice a day. So we're going to fall into the flow state. When you think I had a weekend one time I was playing basketball where I was playing at an extended level, or it wasn't just playing at a high level, but it was so enjoyable every moment. I wasn't worried about how I was doing it, stuff like that. So people have glimpses of it, but then we just go to the next thing because the mind can change and focus on what we don't. That's why a lot of times, that's why he had that, Csikszentmihalyi had that system where he forced, he didn't force, but he gave people the opportunity by paging them to just think about what they're doing and how amazing it is. And then they start to understand. So my job is to help people understand these are the conditions in which the flow state arise. And I think they have the flow genome, and it's something like you got to experience anxiety up to about 4%. So you don't have to, you got to keep moving out of your comfort zone, but you don't have to do it forcefully. You can do it in a gradual way. So 1%, 2%, 3%. When you get to 4%, they said it gets overwhelming and anxiety takes over, but you have to be in a high state of arousal. So I would say we spend most of our time between boredom and anxiety. And so if we're bored, that means that we have to challenge ourselves more. We have to find a purpose to do things on purpose, right?
Yeah.
And then if we're, really challenged, then we got to develop skills, knowledge, and experience to do something. What happens when we feel too challenged? We reduce our standards so that we're not. But what I'm saying is, you don't reduce them; you just bring them down where they're manageable, and then you keep moving, increasing your challenges, but increasing your your wellness or your ability to form better skills, knowledge, and experience. So you are always on this cusp. And what happens is you go up, and then you're in flow, and then it becomes normalized, and then you have to challenge yourself more. So it's like a step function. That's why it's so challenging for people, because you have a flow experience. But then, and we know this from neuroplasticity, that once you groove a pattern, it stops firing. So you have to add complexity to it. You have to add a twist. So if you're playing football and you run a certain pass, route, and then what you have to do is, so you run it and so you groove it, but then what you do is you wrinkle it. You either come back or you go forward, or you add complexity. You add another counter to it, and so you keep building it and keep making it more complex. Because complexity is something we need, because in order for something to be a good flow experience, it has to have increasing complexity. It can't be just like you're on a conveyor belt and you're just putting parts on there. You have to be able to have some complexity. So, okay, so now I get a part and I got to put a screw in, or I got to look at it in a particular way. So it's something about engaging the mind, being out of a comfort zone. And this is how neuroplasticity works. If you think about, you have to have oxygen. So you have to do an aerobic activity. Whatever you're doing has to be done in increments. It has to be just below your limit. So it's doable or hard to do. So you have to struggle. Once again, that struggle comes in. And the fourth thing is you have to bring interest. You got to be interested in it so that you motivate the motivational circuits. It's really simple.
Yeah.
There's neuroplasticity and brain fitness. It was on channel 2 PBS. And it talks about those. Those are the 4 optimum tips for neuroplasticity, which means making nerve connections. And this is what it is. If we only use up to 10% of our capacity, we're talking about the prefrontal cortex of the thinking brain, that we're only using a small percentage of it, but we can use more of it by making these connections, by developing these skills, or what they say, creating more myelin on the myelin sheath. The myelin is this substance that goes around the nerve cells, and when you add to it, it increases the intensity and the accuracy of the firing of the neurons. Not that you needed to know all that, but I'm kind of
No,
like,
oh my God. I mean, and I gotta get you out of here. But that, what you just said to me, so interesting. And I have a bunch of things kind of come into the forefront here, examples of where I've kind of like lived through this. But I love the concept of neuroplasticity, and that like complexity is something that actually needs to be added over time.
That's right.
For continued growth. And I love the example of a step function, but it's funny, the sport analogy makes perfect sense, but for whatever reason, it just made me reflect on, I work in tech. My day job is I'm in technology. And there comes a point where eventually, like, I understand well enough what the company does and what we do and our story and how we position it, that it becomes on autopilot.
Yes, that's right.
And then once that happens, you'd think that you'd be like, oh, well, this is great. My job's so easy. But then it's like the boredom sets in. It's like, well, I can kind of do this and I don't even really need to focus because I've done this a million times. And I was just like, oh man, like, I think, these points in my career where I've kind of gotten bored or really feeling like there's a change.
They used to call it plateau. Yeah.
It's because that complexity element has kind of been taken away.
That's right.
And I was just like, oh wow, like, it's exactly what you described. It's like that path that groove has been made.
Yes.
And I wasn't feeding it with any new complexity or information that was causing me to like grow. And because of that, I was missing a key component of it, being able to like be in that, that flow state and that growth mode.
Yes, but you can do something about it. You can add complexity, or you can challenge yourself and then expand your capacity. That's what we're really talking about. It's continuing to grow and expand your capacity. Now, Malcolm Gladwell, I think it was in his book Outliers, he talks about meaningful work. And the 3 things of meaningful work is autonomy, complexity, and seeing the results of your effort leading to specific like fair exchange. You do the effort, you get a reward for it. And it's not like reward effort in that way, but it's like a recognition, acknowledgement of your accomplishment. So just think about that autonomy. So that means we need to organize our work where we have full autonomy. A lot of times people have situations where they have the responsibility, but not the authority. So when we have autonomy, that means it's on you. Everything you do has a consequence. Now, yeah, we have these relationships and we're part of something bigger. But if we have autonomy and we say, I am, and this is what we have with ourselves when we talk about being ourselves, we have autonomy. Then the complexity is how do we continue to get out of our comfort zone? How do we continue to grow? That's why I talk about in my book, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because once the brain stops firing because it's been grooved, you got to create more connections. You got to create more complexity. So if you're playing basketball and you know how to go right, then you got to work on going left. If you play soccer and you kick with your left foot, then you got to figure out how to kick with your right foot. Learn how to, put a counter move in. So you can see in your life if you're doing the same thing, and that's why cross training is really important. You got to make the brain create more neural pathways, or just not doing it because we get automated and we get on automatic pilot and we're just doing the things, even though what's happening requires us to make a slight shift, but because we're seeing things based on what we know, we're just become automated and we're just doing things without being really present. And the thing is just happening without us having the recognition or the space in between where we can look at it and say, is this the same way? That's why when you read a book many times, because you're looking at it from a different perspective. And if you got an open mind instead of looking at it and looking for what you already know, rather than understanding that there's more, and can you have this open-mindedness? Can you have this self-honesty? Can you have this, what we call a how? Can you have the honesty, open-mindedness, and the willingness to look at things from a different perspective, or to see them with fresh eyes, or even more importantly, to let whatever's in front of you speak to you in its own language without you interpreting it. And that's when we do that. That's when we create that space where you allow the thing to speak to you. And then in that space is where you have the freedom and power to respond, but it slows down things. And that's when you're in a flow state, is because you're allowing things to happen and not trying to make things happen. But you're making real life choices so I'm getting into flow. So the feedback loop, if it could be short, it's really helpful. And in that feedback loop, you're making these minute changes on the fly, and as if you're not even doing it. But when you train yourself, the unconscious knows how to do it. That's why I always say you got to get out of your way, and excuse my language, but there's a song when the Parliaments, they became the Funkadelics, and the title of the song is "Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow." So that's the thing. So when we get out of the way, you do all the training, and then you get out of the way, and then you allow the training to express itself.
Right.
But it's easier said than done, but that's the key. And so when you're in flow, and we've all had flow experiences, I live in flow because this is what I study and teach.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, I'm not trying to be in flow. I just know the conditions, and I know that mindfulness is one component that makes you flow ready, but I call it the superpowers.
Flow ready.
So 5 superpowers. So you have your own power plant and you can have access to higher power.
This has been such an excellent and motivating conversation. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure I could keep you talking for another couple hours.
Yeah,
no, I know you have commitments.
I'm in the zone, brother. I'm in the zone. I'm feeling it.
No, I mean, this is so wonderful. And the thing that I love about this is, this is kind of the perfect example of, it's easy to say like, oh yeah, he works with, professional basketball players. He works with elite athletes. It's like, this is about life. Right. And it's like, it completely translates, and it's like, hey, you want to be a great basketball player? Like, you got to set yourself up to be a great individual, and vice versa. And this has just been such a fascinating conversation. Well, and for people who want to find out more about you, where can I direct them?
So they have georgemumford.com, right? You can do that. And I have a YouTube channel where I do a weekly, I call it At Home with George. So you can check my YouTube channel. Obviously, you can check out my book, The Mindful Athlete: Secrets of Pure Performance. but going to the website, georgemumford.com, and there's a lot of things. I just did a beta test for a youth course, but I have on the Mindful Athlete online course for adults, which is breaking down the 5 superpowers and whatnot. But the main thing is just reach out to my website, or you can just email connect@georgemumford.com.
Excellent.
But this
George,
has been good, man. I got a lot out of this, and I'm struggling because there's a lot going on. My significant other has COVID, just got diagnosed, and I got to go get tested and stuff like that. But it's always amazing that when the adversity is there, the latent abilities express themselves.
It's so funny. And I wasn't going to bring this up, but for whatever reason today, I woke up with a pounding headache, just feeling terrible. And like I said, this has been a super stressful week, just run down. And like 30, 40 minutes into the conversation, I just had this I was like, whoa, all of that is gone for the time being. Like so immersed in the conversation that all of that had just kind of fallen away. And I was like, wow, this is just a pretty incredible example.
Yeah. Well, we'll go in another time, but William James, the father of psychology, he said that, you get a second win when you push, from sports. But he said there could be as many as 13 second wins. And I'm talking about mentally, because I've gone times when I haven't slept at all. But once I get into the moment and into the activity, effort creates energy.
Yeah.
Which is kind of contrary to what we think. You said if we don't have the energy, we don't make the effort. But if you make the effort, like do the thing and you will have the power. This is what Emerson
creates
said.
Energy.
So I just wanted to put that on you. So that's what happened. Once you chose to focus on being present and being interested in something, the energy is going to be there. I don't care if you don't sleep for a week. You have access. That's what they call centropy. There's a energy node that we can connect to that has unlimited power.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Like I said, so these conversations seem to find you when you need them.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's you said to the universe, "This is what I need," and the universe will collude.
Yeah.
All
George,
right, man.
thank you.
I know I got to go. I could keep talking.
Thank you so much.
I'm just getting fired up, man. I'm just getting stuff.
No, likewise. I appreciate it. Well, in the future, we'll have to get you back.
Okay.
But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Welcome, and thank thank you for having me on, and your listeners. Love and blessings to everyone. Have an amazing life, amazing day, amazing summer.
Oh, thank you so much.